Good morning, everybody. We're going to try this live stream on Rumble thing again, despite the fact I hate Rumble. And why do I hate Rumble, everybody? Because they choose not to pay us. That's why. So we as independent content creators are being exploited to the fullest. So, all right. I think we're good. Can't tell. Rumble takes forever to kick in. But, here we are. So, what's going on today is we are going to continue on some Corey Hughes bloody history. We are back to the Kennedy assassination, the single most important event in world history. And so, this is this I found stuffed into the Harold Weisberg Secret Service-CIA files mislabeled. I found a whole stack of Loran Hall and Lawrence Howard interviews and whatnot that are all mislabeled and stuck in the wrong sections, obviously because those two guys were two shooters on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. So anytime that you're looking for anything regarding Loran Hall, Lawrence Howard, William Seymour, you're not going to find anything. You ain't going to find shit. It's all been scuttled because when you come to understand what they did in the book depository that day, you'll really come to understand why they had to go to such great efforts to hide these documents. So let me just give you an example, or multiple examples, when you go through the Jim Garrison files. What you'll find is that, my opinion, once upon a time, Jim DiEugenio, who was a fucking terrible researcher and shitty representative of the Kennedy research community, he said around 40% of Garrison's documents were destroyed. I'm going to say, fuck you. And more like 90% of Jim Garrison's documents were destroyed by Harry Connick Sr., the subsequent district attorney in New Orleans. So these documents were all destroyed, and it's a shame because if you were to actually have the documents that were destroyed, you would find that they did extensive fucking research into Loran Hall, Lawrence Howard, and William Seymour. And those were 3 of the 4 men inside the book depository. You want to add Sergei Arkacha, who was a shooter on the roof. Those are the 4 men that were inside the book depository that day, who were witnessed by Richard Randolph Carr and Arnold Roland and Arnold Roland's fucking wife and Carolyn Walters. And a whole fucking slew of other people, right? When you got a dark-skinned Negro with something wrong with his face, right? As though it was marked in some kind of way, as per the statements of Mr. Roland. It becomes obvious that the man who was in the sniper's nest was Lawrence Howard. And when you come to understand the relationships at play here, you realize that Lawrence Howard was running back and forth across the country between early 61 and the assassination, all the way from Miami to New Orleans to Dallas to Los Angeles and back and forth. You come to understand the relationships at play here. You come to realize that Loran Hall was the second shooter on the 6th floor. And why? Because there's no one else. And the study of the assassination is the study of relationships. And anybody who will criticize the notion that relationships are the fundamentals of the assassination, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? You're not going to go murder somebody with a perfect stranger. You're going to go murder somebody with somebody you know, who you trust, who's got your back, right? So that's how these relationships in the Kennedy assassination were kind of at play here, right? And so, for another example, Sergei Arkacha was the shooter on the roof who left the Mauser 7.65 on the roof of the depository, which is confirmed by the Dallas Police Department, but you'll only find that in one source, Gary Shaw's. What the fuck was that book called? God damn it, I can't remember the name of that book. Cover Up? Yeah, it's called Cover Up. That's got explicitly the quote from the Dallas police that says that it was left there by a security guard, but we all know there were no security guards on the roof. So you have the Dallas Police Department covering for Sergei Arkacha, who left the Mauser 7.65, and then you have we're not going to talk about it today at all, pretty much, but you have Emilio Santana, who was the shooter at the Daltex underneath the fire escape ledge. But this all connects to Loran Hall, who was one of the shooters on the 6th floor, and he most likely fired the shots that struck Governor Connolly, because he's a bad shot. But this interview was scuttled. I mean, you're not going to find this interview anywhere except for in the Weisberg collection. You will not even find this Jim Garrison interview in the Jim Garrison files. Okay? So that tells me that all those motherfucking files were destroyed. But I got enough preamble. Let's go ahead and get this thing underway. Interview with Loran Hall, May 6, 1968. This is the second of two interviews conducted by Jim Garrison. We have one more interview of Loran Hall conducted by Weisberg himself, which is 150 pages, which will... we're not going to go over this this week because I'm still getting through Mexico City, but I wanted to break up Mexico City a lot because I'm sure I'm losing some of you because of how dry it is, right? So just to recap Mexico City, Oswald allegedly goes to Mexico City and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't him. It was Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley went there 3 times. He went there in May, August, and then again in September. All the stories about David Atlee Phillips handling Oswald are pure bunk. If the stories told by Vesiana are true and that he met with Maurice Bishop, and that Maurice Bishop was in the company of Oswald. First off, you're never going to have a fucking handler mix contacts ever in a meeting, so I don't believe the story happened at all. But if you're going to believe anything of the sort, you're going to have to believe that the man Vesiana saw was Kerry Thornley and not Lee Harvey Oswald, because Oswald is the dumbest fucking ignorant patsy of all time. He doesn't know any of the shit's going on. That motherfucker was out doing shit for the FBI around the country. They were keeping him out of town in key places, keeping him occupied. So when you get into Mexico City, like we've been covering for the last 2 months, okay, it's been the most in-depth fucking examination of Mexico City that's ever been done. It's unbelievable what's going on down there. Those people are such idiots. I mean, whether you're talking about Win Scott or Robert Shaw or Ann Goodpasture or White, what the fuck was his name? White. All these fucking guys, they're like, I don't know what happened. It wasn't my responsibility. It was somebody else's responsibility, right? And so you come to realize that there's a blatant cover-up going on in Mexico City. And that's what we've been on for the last 2 months, and we're probably going to be on Mexico City for another month or so. So to break it up a little bit, we're going to do this Loran Hall interview, and probably a couple weeks from now, I'll do another Loran Hall interview, and then a couple weeks later, I have a Lawrence Howard interview we'll get to. But we have all the time in the world, don't we? So, interview with Loran Hall, May 6, 68. Present are Loran Hall and Jim Garrison, James Alcock, Andrew Sciambra, Tom Bethel, and Louis Ivan. So it starts off cut already. It's a 51-page transcript, and it starts off with an answer, not a question. So Hall says, I had hepatitis, and I showed him my arm and everything, and he says, you've got hepatitis. And then I went, in fact, I wasn't even going to go to court the next day. And my attorney, you little turd, you're going. So I wound up going to court the next day for a final hearing. And then that morning I was in the vet's hospital. What did the doctor conclude about the cause of the hepatitis? Did he speculate? Jim, yeah, he did. You see, if you've got infectious hepatitis, they put screens around you and all this stuff, and they put you in a restricted ward, but with me, they didn't. And the only thing they kept telling me was, how long have you been an addict? And I said, what? And they said, well, you've been an addict. And I said, why is that? And they said, because you've got so-and-so hepatitis. And I said, so what? And he's like, you got it from a needle or something. Yeah, and then he started talking. He said, you were an addict. And I said, hell no, I'm not an addict. And he said, you've had any blood transfusions in the last 6 months? I said, no, I haven't. And he says, well, have you had any shots or anything like that? And I said, my doctor gave me a shot for a cold that I had about 3 or 4 months ago. And he said that wouldn't have been it. And he said, sure looks to me like you've been hit with a needle. So then when it starts dawning on me what he's trying to tell me, about 4 or 5 weeks later, I asked him for a letter. I don't want to be involved. So I said, fine, what the hell? You can't push those people. And then the next question is, we've already asked you about Ted Slack and John Bloomer. You don't know these people, right? I don't think that I do. I haven't seen a picture of them or anything. The names don't sound familiar? The only one that could possibly sound familiar is Bloomer. He's from St. Louis. All right, so let me give you some background on Ted Slack and John Bloomer. So Ted Slack, I went down a fucking rabbit hole and a half on. Ted Slack was suspected of having been the Short Tramp. Now, the Short Tramp was actually Vincent Caltagirone Jr. When you dig into Ted Slack, you find Ted Slack was another one of these guys. He did actually kind of look somewhat like he was kind of a dark-skinned, somewhat Cuban-looking guy. And he was heavily involved in right-wing activities down in Florida. So when you dig into Ted Slack, I mean, I thought I was seriously onto something, but I thought there were like 3 or 4 different people who were the Short Tramp. until I realized, holy shit, it was Vincent Calderon the whole time. The connection to the Winterland was all in place. But Ted Slack, ends up being completely fucking irrelevant. Interesting guy to dig into, but he was nobody really special, and he was involved in right-wing activities down in Florida. John Bloomer, same thing. He wasn't from St. Louis. He was from, like, Indiana. And John Bloomer was accused of being the tall tramp, but, of course, not the tall tramp. Was Danny Green. So compare any pictures of the tall tramp to pictures of Danny Green in 1962. You'll find that distinct curl in the front of his head. So he's asking him about Ted Slack and John Bloomer. He's asking him about the three tramps. But obviously, let me see, would Loran Hall know anything about the three tramps who were from Cleveland? And nah, he wouldn't know anything about that at all. Like, period. Different chain of command. So then Hall says, well, I wouldn't have met him in St. Louis. I would have met him in Kansas City in 59. Yeah, I would have met him in 59. And something's broken up there. And it says, is the one that I'm thinking about, he would have been working in a hotel in Kansas City in a night clerk, and he was involved in the Lacaya Forfan in Chester, Lacaya. These were two Nicaraguans that were planning an invasion of Nicaragua in either late 59 or early 60, and they pulled the thing off, but they got wiped out at the pass. Then Garrison asks, Hemming indicates that Bloomer was a Minuteman. Would that fit into your recollection if you did meet him? No, because there was nothing mentioned about Minutemen or nothing like that. Lacaya, I wonder if that was the name of the man who was in prison with Bradley, the Nicaraguan who was in prison with Bradley. Just vaguely, Jim. You mean Leslie Bradley? Yes. Do you know Leslie Bradley? Speaking of him, there's another Bradley named Leslie Bradley. Was he in Cuba during the revolution? Yeah. There's a chance that I know him because I met him, prior to my being arrested over in Cuba. I met him five or six of the Americans that was over there during the revolution, like Farini. He means Fiorini. He's talking about Frank Sturgis. Thompson, Austin Young. I met quite a few of these. What time are you talking about? 58 and 59. Castro was in the hills. In 58, he was in the hills, but in 59, when I met all these guys, this was in Havana after Castro had taken over. What caused such a complete departure of all Americans? Castro had an awful lot supporting him at first, and then it reached a point where they were all gone. You mean the ones that were in there in the mountains with him and so forth? Yeah. Well, I think you'll find that in about February, he told, first of all, the American ambassador Bonzel put the word out that all you clowns better get out of the country, because if you become an officer's rank, you lose your American citizenship. And so there was probably a third of them left over that. And then Castro came out with, well, we don't something U3 or U4 in the Army. How about, and then it's cut off here. Trying to read this, something and getting your college education and all this stuff. So those few left the country, and then there was, I'll say, be April when I was arrested. There probably wasn't over 8 or 9 of us, something there that was in the service. And the question is, Castro kind of burned against his American supporters. Oh yeah, you could tell this right off from the beginning. The only Americans that really had anything going on was William Morgan. Guys, we need to, guys in my research chat, we need to fucking do the deepest dive into William Morgan of all time. It's a necessity. We need to come to figure out who this fucking guy really was, because his name pops up everywhere. He's the only one. And the question is, he ended something, didn't he? Yeah. And the next question is, do you suppose a something of that was the fact that the CIA was something degree, and he probably decided something to tell them all, because every something they take Hemming assigned out there. God, and this is all broken up. Sorry guys, I can't read any of this shit. And then it says, well, Hemming something. This is Hemming's story. Hemming was with William Morgan. Hemming told me that he had chosen something William Morgan, and I can never recall having seen Hemming all of the time that I was in Havana. I can never remember ever seeing him. And then Garrison says, he speaks of William Morgan in one of his letters. And Hall says, he told me he something with William Morgan, and this is quite possible that he was CIA. I don't know. The only thing I know is that William Morgan was either a double agent for Castro. By that I mean he had Trujillo sent that bunch from Santo Domingo to invade Cuba. And like when they landed, something were all zapped out real quick because the Fidel something were waiting for them, and William Morgan came out smelling like a rose on this, because they something said he set the whole thing up, and he became a hero of it. But then they found out that somehow or another, they found out that William Morgan really wanted this invasion from Trujillo to take place, and he really wanted it to be successful. But when he found out that Fidel had known about it, then he copped the whole thing out to Fidel, who in the hell... something, it's just an entangled damn thing that, then Garrison asks, somewhere along the line, Castro something to have become a different person, seems to have become a different person than he was before. Something changed, didn't it? He says, I won't say that. This is what I said in the beginning, and this is what I thought in 59, that it looked like he was gonna swing either way, but then when you check into his background, Jim, you find out that in 1948 he was with the communist delegation to Cuba and the Bogota-Colombia deal. This is what they were going to smear the president of the United States and get rid of the OAS, the Organization of American States? I can't tell what that is. And find that something can't read that. Several people when it was going to... Oh, and this whole fucking page is missing. Well, that sucks. All right, and then it picks up something college. Hell, there was a police record on him there at the police station that wouldn't stop. Of course, it's been destroyed now. He had been a radical bastard all the time, so I'm not going to say that he was not a radical communist prior to 59 because I don't know. Let me ask you a little point here. Have you ever bumped into Richard Lochley? He was one of the top Minutemen until he split from Dupuy, D-U-P-U-Y. He's from California? No, he's from Missouri. He was training north of Lake Pontchartrain, one of the CIA camps. No, I didn't know him. Did you ever hear of a fellow named F. Lee Chrisman? Travels a lot in Tacoma, all over the country. No. Here's the name of a guy that Wheat's been living with. He's talking about Clinton Wheat, G. Clinton Wheat. George Clinton Wheat, living with now. His name is Al Hunt, publisher of the National Chronicle. He lives in Bernie, California, wherever the hell that is. That's clear up north. You don't know who that is? There was a Hunt that worked for the Poor Richard bookstore down in Hollywood. Ooh, the Poor Richard bookstore in Hollywood comes up. That's shocking. That's connected to Hemming and a whole bunch of fucking stuff in Los Angeles, but we'll get to that another time. There was a Hunt that worked at the Poor Richard bookstore down in Hollywood, and I would say he was probably about 28 or 29 in 63. This was possible. It could be the same one. He was also a Minuteman, and oh hell, he was a member of a lot of different organizations. He worked for Renuzzi. Renuzzi had the bookstore there on Hollywood, and like it's like Renuzzi knew Bradley, and like Hunt worked for Renuzzi, and I would give a talk at Renuzzi's place, and heck, I would see a lot of the same faces I had seen at Wheat's house there at Renuzzi's store, and so they all run in the circle, and yet you never see these two guys together, but you'll see this guy's best friend over here. And this is what I found when I was giving my talks, just like Bradley now says. Yes, I was at Wheat's house for 2 speeches. I don't remember Hall, but I was there for 2. I heard one guy speak, and then I gave a talk. But Christ, when he gave his talks, there were people from 5 or 6 organizations that came to listen to him. Well, it's like you're seeing Kerry Thornley at Separate Speech in Whittier, and you don't see him connected directly with those guys, yet when something happens, he turns up to be part of it in another part of the country. Yeah, so in the March 20th, what fucking year was this, 78, or I don't even remember what year this was, whatever year we talked about, 68, he mentions that he saw Kerry Thornley, and he recognized the name, and he fucking recognized him from a meeting in Whittier, California, remember? And so that meeting in Whittier, California had to have occurred between early May of 1963 and late August of 63, because Kerry Thornley was then in Whittier, California before he makes the cut back to Mexico City and back to New Orleans by September 4th. Therefore, the connection between Kerry Thornley and Loran Hall to me is he must have knew him from David Ferry and the party that Perry Russo saw Leon Oswald at, right? So that all pretty much makes perfect sense to me. The idea that he would ever admit that he knew Kerry Thornley, it just goes to show how fucking stupid Loran Hall really was. I mean, this guy loved to run his fucking mouth. It's unbelievable. Truly. If you were involved in the assassination of the president, your only response should be to investigators is to fuck off. Prove it. That's it. That's all you should ever say. And then, so, let me see what the question is here. He says, asked him about Kerry Thornley, and then he says, it's like I cannot say that I definitely absolutely remember Thornley, but it seems to me like when I seen that one picture that he was in Whittier at one of the talks I gave. Did we suggest Whittier before that conclusion reached your mind? I don't know this. I asked Billings. He showed me a picture of him, and I said, God damn, he looks familiar. And I said, had he ever been to California? He says, yeah. And I said, from where? And he said, Whittier. And I said, oh man, Christ, this has really got me start to giving my talks from some friends of mine out there in the Whittier area. And said, oh man, don't tell Garrison. Don't even mention that to Garrison. There's a possibility that you knew Thornley. Exactly, you dumb shit. Why would you admit that? Jesus Christ, just the idea that fucking Loran Hall knows Kerry Thornley is proof of a conspiracy in and of itself, because he shouldn't know him. When he says that, is he kidding or what? No, he's dead serious. What do you suppose his angle is? Not to tell us. It's some sort of interest. That, I don't know. This is what I'm saying. I talked to one guy, for example, Schiller, Cohen, and somebody by the name of Jones came to my attorney's office the night before my first hearing, January 10th, and like Schiller says, he calls my attorney and says, I think I've got some information that might be of help to Hall, but in return, I want him to help us, and then we have the meeting. So my attorney calls me and says, I think it might be beneficial to us, and I said, fine. So we got there, and Schiller did all of this, and I said, fine. So we got there, and Schiller did all the talking, and then he started in there and says, there's one thing that I know that Garrison wants to know. Have you ever been to New York? And I said, yes, I was. And he says, when was this? And I said, it was either March or April. And he said, boy, you're in trouble because this fits right along with what Garrison's thinking about. And he says, for your own good, you better fight all this you can because this really might put you in some trouble. And I said, look, he wanted to know then when I went to New York, so I told him. So I told him what the deal was on New York, that I went there to see Cantabie. That's the Haitian, on this Haitian invasion thing. And he said, that's when you were out there. Did you meet Mas Ferrer? And I said, hell no, I didn't meet Mas Ferrer. And he said, did you know Mas Ferrer? And I said, I knew Kiki there in Miami, but I only met him once. And he said, boy, you got problems. And I tell you, I was so goddamn scared because I started reading the reports. Like the FBI report said that I said this crap, and I started finding all this out and this other crap, and I couldn't find the witnesses. And then I found the witness, but then they wouldn't say that I can't be in court today because I'm working. Or like, Jesus, Skip, I remember seeing you, but I don't remember that day. It was I was running scared because I, like everybody said, man, he's a maniac, referring to you. And now and I'm going around like this here. Garrison then says, Schiller's a lovely guy. He's been a real help in this whole thing. Let me ask you about Wheat. Have you thought of any other characters that hung around Wheat's house since we talked last night? Well, there was, Jim. You're going to find that my memory of names is not too good. If you can't remember the name, you can describe them. Right. Well, there was one alcoholic that spent a lot of time there at Wheat's house. He was a friend of Wheat's. He said that he had gotten out of the drunk tank, I think at county jail, and went to work there. You see, he started staying there at Wheat's house when Dr. Drennan wanted to build the bunker, the cement bunker at his house. This drunk and Wheat went out and built the cement bunker. Does he have one there now? No, because he moved from that house. No, I think he lives in Lake Hollywood. Steve Burton's got his address and telephone number and everything. Anyway, you have the alcoholic. Yeah. What does he look like? As I recall, he would probably be 53 or 54 and 64. He was typical looking alcoholic, you know. Puffy? Yeah, puffy. And he had probably stood about 5'9", probably weighed 150. I think he had a good education at one time or another because when he was sober and he wasn't shaking, he sounded pretty... Lou, that almost sounds like the number 3 man in the photograph. Don't we have one in which you can almost see him, which we could show for comparison purposes in the walking picture? You know, where he's almost in view. He's almost, he's a real alcoholic bum. He's listed that way. You have the first 2, and then you have the 3rd man that's usually hidden. You can't see his face partly. Comes into view. Okay, so he's talking about the 3 tramps again. He keeps trying to connect fucking Loran Hall to the 3 tramps. You're barking up the wrong tree, buddy. The man he's talking about is Leo Mosseri, who is the old tramp. Leo Mosseri, longtime Cleveland mob guy, worked under James Licavoli, and he was the one-time boss of Danny Green, the Irishman, who at the time of the assassination was the head of the Longshoremen Union, but clearly is clearly the tall tramp in Daly Plaza. So, but I don't know why he keeps trying to connect him to these fucking guys. Probably because he assumes that it's Ted Slack and these guys from the Minutemen, but it's not. So. Eventually, Garrison will make the connection between. Eventually, he will make the connection between these guys and Cleveland, but not for a while. But John Lorenz and his 2 buddies, they spent a lot of time there. Would you say Lorenz is a German? I don't know what in hell he would be. I really don't. Is he a NSRP? I would say so, definitely. I would say, in fact, that I would say he practically, everybody there at the house was NSRP. Drennan was known to be. Well, Gale was too. Talking about Colonel William Gale, who was a right-wing preacher guy heavily involved in all this stuff with Dr. Drennan, the dentist, and all these fucking right-wing lunatics back in 63. But in hindsight, they weren't really too much of lunatics, were they? If they were to see what was going on in this country fucking today, they'd be out killing people, like no joke. See, America isn't what it used to be. We don't have this kind of cut of raw mercenary like we used to. People willing to assassinate the president, you know? But Gale's an interesting guy. Not to be confused with Paul Gale, the CIA head of the Iranian station during the time of the Shah. And also my uncle by marriage from fucking 40 years ago. We'll get into him a whole nother time. I have a feeling he was involved in this somehow, but I can't really place it considering his location at the time. But, all right. So he says, that simplifies things. I knew Gale was too, but I didn't classify him as NSRP. When he says NSRP, he's talking about, was he a Nazi? National Socialist Republican Party or something like that. Oh, Christ, Gale. In fact, Gale had the Signal Hill American Legion Club. They lost their national franchise because of Gale. Yeah, but I mean, it isn't just the case of his being radical. He's NSRP. No, National States Rights Party. Okay, NSRP is National States Rights Party, which really these guys were they were Nazis. Good. In fact, on his ticket when he was running, this is what his big thing was, running on the national states' rights. And I don't know about Bradley. Like I say, I only met him that one time. What does Gale do now? I don't know. I have no idea. I had heard that he was down around, I think, around La Jolla, which is close to San Diego. I mean, has he calmed down any? Oh, no. He's still real active. Did Gale ever show up at Wheat's house? Oh, yes. He was there the night that Bradley was there. In fact, it was Gale and Bradley that were standing together in the back of the room when I gave my talk. Do you remember roughly when that was? I would say September of 63. It would have either had to have been August or September of 63. I would have had to have been down to one of those dates. I'm almost positive it was September. Was that shortly after the Whittier talk? No, this was a month later or two. Okay, so let's do some timelining here. So he had this talk that he gave in September of 63, and the Whittier talk was 2 months prior to that. That would put it in, July? That's perfect timing. That's exactly when Kerry Thornley was in Whittier. So all of this is 100% true. The Whittier talk would have been about August of 63, probably. July or August. I'm not trying to pin you down. It would have been July or August. And then Garrison says, that's when Thornley was back in California. Who else was there at Wheat's house that you can recall? Okay, so you got was Thornley ever at G. Clinton Wheat's house? That's not that it really has much implication on anything other than to show that Kerry Thornley was well plugged in with these fucking mercenary types out in the LA area during summer of 63. And that's pretty fucking significant because it would show that when you come to understand Thornley and how he ended up in New Orleans in allegedly February of 61, but I don't believe it. I believe he was there in January of 61 because I believe it was him at the Bolton Ford incident. But when you come to understand that Thornley was basically connected to all the primary people in the assassination through handlers like Kent Courtney and like Martin McAuliffe, and you realize it was Martin McAuliffe who was introduced to him by Joyce Talley, and then Martin McAuliffe introduced Kerry Thornley to Guy Bannister, right? And then allegedly Jessica Luck brings Kerry Thornley to David Ferry's apartment in June or July of 62, right? So, I mean, when you come to understand that Kerry Thornley is a dumb fuck and that he was put into places where he was handled and put there by handlers, you come to realize that he was obviously instructed to return to Whittier, California and start to interact with these guys by one of his handlers in New Orleans. Who knows? Could it have been Bud Simcoe? It sure as fuck could. It sure as fuck could. So this is where real assassination talk, right? These are real people who are behind the assassination no one ever talks about, who were the handlers of the characters like Kerry Thornley. So, all right, I'm fucking rambling. Whenever I catch myself rambling, I'm just going to get back to it. So he goes, that's when Thornley was back in California. Who else was there at Wheat's house that you can recall? Well, like there was two old ladies, and I know that one of them had been an editor or something for the paper. And there was, I want to say that the Adialots were there, and I'm not certain. As I recall, the Adalots were there because it was really surprised me that when they showed up, because they had already heard my talk at some other place out in San Fernando Valley. There was, I think that there was a man there who gave a talk on Spain, Spanish Revolution. I think he was there. I could find his name real easy. My wife was there. What did he have to say? Really, it was nothing. It was like when I gave my talk, the first thing they started doing was hitting me with questions like, they were hitting me with like, aren't you fighting this paper tiger? And I said, what do you mean by that? Well, who really is our enemy? And I'd say the communists. Well, who are the communists? And I'd say, what are you trying to say? Well, isn't the Jews behind this thing? And shouldn't they be exterminated? And this was the route that they were going with me. And I'd start changing questions to different people because I didn't want to get involved with the goddamn thing. So when the meeting was over, Wheat took me back and introduced me to Bradley and Gail. And Bradley was, as I recall, he was like, I'm the big deal. So just shake my hand and get the pleasure of shaking my hand, but don't get too close to me. And it seemed like Gail was like, don't touch me or say anything to me because Gail was here and he'll take care of you. You know, it was kind of like an attitude. He started talking and he says, your talk was very interesting. Would you like to meet the Reverend McIntyre? And I said, yes, I would. And then he said, maybe I can set up a date. And I told him then I don't think it will be possible because I'll be leaving town before long. And he started talking about my contacts that I had in Dallas. And I recall I told him Lester Logue and Hunt, Dan Smoot, and General Walker. Let's pull everything on Dan Smoot, please. We haven't ever talked about him. And General Walker and all of this. And then he wanted to know who I knew in Miami. And I said, the only one that I do know is Dr. Crockett. And he said, who do you know there? And I told him, I said, what do you mean? I told him that John Russello knows me because he sanctioned me to give the talks to the John Birch groups. And I told him that I had met Dr. Ford out at the Knott's Farm. And this is all that was said. And someone walked over and said something about, do you really think that Kennedy was responsible for the Bay of Pigs failure? And I said, hell, that's a matter of record. And he said something else, and he said something ought to be done about that son of a bitch, referring to Kennedy. I don't even know who it was. I think it was a woman that got it started. Oh, and up here it says Knott's Berry, not Nosberry. Was this the smaller group after the speech? Just probably 5 or 6 of us standing around. Lorenz and his 2 buddies. Gail was standing there, and Bradley was standing there. And as I recall, Wheat came back and introduced us, and Wheat went back in the kitchen to get the coffee and donuts and cookies ready. And I probably didn't talk to Bradley over, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, and then him and Gail and I think Lorenz and they all left together. One thing happened. There was a fellow, I'm almost positive this was the night, there was a fellow by the name of Gene that worked at the same place that I worked for, Ted Violet. I think they called it the Globe Oil Company or the Harbor Oil Company. And he was there, and when I was over talking to some people, he had gotten in an argument over there, and I don't know if it was with Bradley or Gail or with who, but we came in there and got involved in it, and then he came into the kitchen to get me because I was back there having a cup of coffee with Wheat's wife, and Wheat came in and said, get that son of a bitch out of here because he's causing trouble. So I walked in and I got Gene, and who's Wheat talking about? This Gene, the one who came in here with me, and he said, Gene, get out of here because he's causing the trouble. Okay, so let me just fucking, actually, I'm going to read the sentence, and then I'm going to do a little surmise here because I think he's talking about Eugene Bradley, who was one of the fake Secret Service agents in Dealey Plaza. But obviously, Dealey Plaza was filled with people who knew what was going to happen. And they were there as assassination tourists, pretty much. Because everybody fucking knew what was going on. Like, even people talk about Miltier, like Miltier was somebody special. Joseph Miltier, he's nobody fucking special. He was just one of these right-wing nuts who knew about the shit because these fucking idiots like G. Clinton Wheat couldn't keep their goddamn mouth shut. Loose lips sink ships. And that's exactly what the fuck was going on prior to the assassination with all these idiots. That's how they all... I highly doubt that fucking they were invited there. They probably just knew about it and showed up upon their own. Whether or not they had Secret Service identification, I think is a fucking, it's a red herring. All right, let me continue on. And I said, who? And he said, that one standing in the back there. It could have been either Bradley or Gail. I don't know which one he was talking about. And he said, watch that dirty bastard because he's trying to cut you up. He's talking about Eugene Bradley here. He got in the car and left, and that's the last time I had seen Gene because I quit working out there at the oil company because he was there at the meeting. I went back inside the meeting when Gene left, and Wheat said, oh, man, I can't have crap like that at this meeting, and I don't want the guy back here in the house. And I said, fine. I probably stay there another 10 or 15 minutes. Well, anyway, Gail and Bradley, and I'm almost positive that Lorenz and his 2 buddies all left the building at the same time. Now, whether they left in the same car or not, I don't know, but I'm positive that they all walked out of the building at the same time. With reference to these guys you mentioned at Wheat's house, you seem to have who had the most authority, any impressions about authority. It didn't give me an impression of rank. Let me put it this way. The one that looked like they respected the most, like respect was Bradley, and then it looked like Gale, and then it was where this looked like Bradley seemed to be the equivalent to Gale. No, it seemed to me like even more so, because, like, don't touch me. Gale will handle all this for me. How did Wheat stand in regards to them? Did he have any status? That is purely subjective, but I'm interested. It seemed to me like, of course, I have to now to go to the opinion that possibly something was going on there towards the Kennedy thing. I have to assume this now, and I would say that Wheat would have been something like a sergeant. Like, you don't know nothing, but you'll run errands and you'll have the meetings here. And it seemed like they would be using Wheat. Like the officers coming to the house to lecture and leave. I mean, this is what it looked like to me. That's the only reference to Kennedy specifically that you recall. At that meeting, yes, there's been many times, in fact, held that they had a Minuteman meeting in there. I mean, with that group? Yes, with that group, that was the only thing that was mentioned. Have you ever seen Colonel Gale on any other occasions? I've seen him I think there was twice when I gave my talk, and I'm almost certain that Gale was at a meeting then I gave in Saugus, and then the American Legion meeting down there. And this was where Fowler, the head of the Ku Klux Klan, lived, and I'm almost positive, I don't want to say for sure, but I think he was there at that meeting. Were any people at that meeting at Whittier that were at this meeting? No, none of them. The meeting that I had in Whittier, this was like a completely different breed of cat. Like there were highly militant radical. You mean the LA meetings? The ones there at Wheat's house, anti-Semitic, anti-nigger, just anti-everything. Real strong militants. Whereas in Whittier, they were just conservatives, interested conservatives. Well, the LA meeting you just described, would you say essentially was an NSRP group? I'd say so, yeah. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I ever went to hardly ever went to a meeting where there wasn't talk about killing Kennedy. Even with the conservatives, they went so far as to be sitting there and they'd say what we should do is get up and assassinate a team of 10, 20, or 30 people that are really dedicated people who don't mind losing their life. And then we'd get the list of people who should go be assassinated and let them go do the job. This happened all over, even with what I would call the non-militant conservatives. The subject always came up. Like I was at another house in Whittier and I was giving my talk and this son of a bitch walks in with his fatigues on and his combat coat on and a 45 strapped on his side like he was some kind of nut. Like he didn't fit into the picture because everyone else was in their shirt and tie and coat. And they were churchgoers and all this jazz. He probably left his bunker just long enough to come to the meeting. This is true. This is exactly what he did. You're laughing, Jim, but it's God's truth. Jim Garrison then says, finished his K-rations and leave. He did. He used to live in Whittier, and his name was Thornton or something like that, and he was about 47 or 48 years old. Thornton? Thornton or Thornhill, not Thornley. It could have been. I just knew it was Thorn something. Could his last name have been Thornley? It could have been, but he was 47 or 48, a heavy-set guy, and out in front, he had a Jeep, and they were telling me I'm telling you that they had a Jeep out in front, and they had moved from Whittier, and they had bought a hillside, and had built his house there on the side of this hill, and the whole thing is nothing but a great big bunker. In fact, he told me, man, if you ever get the heat on you or anything and you need a safe house, come up to my place because they couldn't get me with a bomb. Did you ever encounter Dr. Drennan at any other time? Oh, yes, I've been with Dr. Drennan. Oh, Christ, I've seen him 7-8 times at Wheat's house. Let me tell you something about Dr. Drennan I'm sure you already know. In Dr. Drennan's case, in the commission exhibits, there were actually separate investigations of Dr. Drennan as early as the summer of '63. The one with regards to possible plans on his part to kill President Kennedy. One is a Secret Service investigation. The other one is an FBI investigation. On the other hand, there is none after November 22nd. It's just ignored. So we're really interested in Dr. Drennan. Suppose you tell us what you can recall about him. Well, there was, as I recall, the first time I met him, we started talking about Kennedy, like the son of a bitch should have gotten rid of all of this and this. And I've talked about somebody ought to blow his goddamn head off or somebody ought to put a bomb in his plane or, and I made the remark like this. But when it gets right down to sorry about that. When it gets down to the meaty, gritty part of it, I back off. It's like when Drennan started to say something, I said, forget it. Like there's no way that I want to become involved in anything like this because my thing's in Cuba. I don't, in fact, I in the talk would tell him this is not the time to go into the mountains and start shooting and fighting. Your fight is now down here on the streets with the word of truth. And like this is the message that I got across to Drennan. And like nothing like that was ever brought up again. Do you think this is Dr. Drennan's attitude? Dr. Drennan's attitude was that if he could find somebody that would really do it, he would get up the money for it. You felt that he was committed. Oh, yeah. He was committed, that he knew that there was a hospital, a mental hospital in Alaska that had 1 million acres of ground, and this is where they were going to go to take all the conservatives and frontal something is redacted. And I mean, he was firmly convinced that this was going to happen to him, and then it was just took a matter of time before they took him to the mental hospital and did this to him. And like, I'm going to get that son of a bitch before he gets me. And this is the attitude I got from Drennan. But that was the only time that he ever talked to me about anything like that. The rest of the time he'd been in that house, he and Wheat would be over in a different part of the room talking, and I couldn't hear what was said. Or else I would see him come to the house, and I'd be out in the garage making ammunition or fixing up some weapons that I had, and I had no idea what they were talking about. What house did you see Drennan at? Wheat's house. Hang on just one second, please. How many times have you been to Wheat's house? I've given 3 talks there, but he had a garage out back, and this is where we made ammunition, and I went to that house hundreds of times, taking equipment to the garage. And you saw Drennan there how many times? Oh, probably 7 or 8 times, and then I got some medical equipment off Drennan just a couple nights before I left to come to Miami. What was some of the equipment that caused you trouble in Dallas? Was that the equipment that caused you trouble in Dallas? Yeah, it came from Drennan. So if you're not aware, Loran Hall and William Seymour got busted in Dallas in October of 1963 with a whole truck full of merchandise that was mostly medical equipment, but they had a bunch of speed pills, and that's what they were arrested for. Now, for some reason, they never got charged or they never got booked or anything. They were in jail. They never even made it to jail, actually. Their photographs were taken, all the documentation was made, and then for some reason, a couple hours later, they were cut loose. I don't recall if they were cut loose with all their medical supplies. I don't think so. I know that they got busted with speed pills, and that's why they were really taken into custody. Obviously, somebody made a fucking phone call and got them out of trouble, because that documentation no longer exists. You won't find it at the Texas portal or anywhere else for that matter. Trust me, I've fucking looked. Did Drennan seem to have any authority in that group? I'll say that they respected him and they listened to what he had to say. Did he seem to have wealthy contacts? Oh yes, Drennan did. In other words, this is subjective, but your impression, I take it, is that he would be the money man. As far as I'm concerned, he was the only one there at the house that had money or really had sufficient contacts to have money. Because like Gale, I never heard him talk about anything, but Drennan, you could tell that Drennan had money and could get money, because the fact of the matter is, if I'm mistaken, is I think he gave Wheat some money. They were talking about it. No, I am almost positive that Wheat told me he got some money off of him and that he was going to have to pay Drennan back some money that he borrowed off of him. You've seen Drennan with Wheat. Who else have you seen with Drennan? Just there at Wheat's house. I mean, at the Wheat house. Who did? He'd go around with everybody. He'd talk to, you seen him with Gale? Oh, yeah. In fact, Gale, I've seen him back there with Bradley. I've seen him talking with everybody. The night you talked with Bradley was when Bradley was there. Drennan was there too? Yes. Do you know who the head of the NSRP group is out there? I have no idea whatsoever. Could it be Gale? It could be, but I don't know. The commission exhibits associate Drennan with NSRP, but Gale has a number of other titles. I think he has 3 or 4 other organizations, each one of them semi-religious. Semi-religious. Here we go with those fake churches again. Well, Gale's, I think you'll find that they're all from that house. They're all involved in 4 or 5 different organizations, maybe just on the fringes of the organization, like maybe they'll attend meetings or something like this here, but at least they're involved in 4 or 5 different ones. At that time, you were conscious that the National States Rights Party was one of them. Yeah, well, I shouldn't say that because they didn't say I'm in the National States Rights Party, but they espoused all of their stuff, all their propaganda. This is what they espoused upon. This is what they talked about. Anyone else in LA who might not have seen with that particular group that you associate with the NSRP. There was possibly one of those fellows who was on that sheriff patrol could quite possibly fit into that. He knew Gale when Gale was running for congressman, and they had some real way out lunatics that lived out there in the Saugus area, such as that one woman I was telling you about with the laser gun. But that would only be the only one I know of. Sheriff of what county is that? LA County. He had an automobile accident and got a medical retirement from the sheriff's department. Is there anybody in Miami that you associate with the NSRP? I didn't know anybody in Miami that was NSRP. Somebody mentioned it to me, if I remember the name of Miltier. Here we go, Joseph Miltier, and I might have met him. Okay, so now we know how Joseph Miltier found out about the assassination, right? Through Loran Hall. Okay, whenever one of these fucks says, I might have met him, you know that they fucking are best friends, okay? That's how these people operate. If I had met him, it would have been at the bookstore that Patrick hung around at. The bookstore in Miami. Yes. What bookstore was that? It was it a right-wing bookstore? Yeah, it was a right-wing bookstore. Did it have one of those names like Patrick Henry Bookstore or something like that? Yeah, in fact, I think that was the name of it. What about, guys in the research chat, let's pull everything on the Patrick Henry Bookstore down in Miami. What about Dallas? You know any NSRP members in Dallas or who might be? No, of course, Dallas is a different breed of cat altogether. It's like at the meeting at Logue's house when the old boy jumped up and said, rather than give $2,000 for this thing here, I'd rather donate to $50,000 pot and have Kennedy killed. And like you can say that there's a possibility he might be in this. When was that said? That would have been probably, I think it would have to have been June at the June meeting I had there on my way back to California, or in October when I was going back down to Miami from California. I don't remember what time it was. Well, I'll tell you what fucking time it was. It was in March of 1963, because that's when Jerry Hemming puts the meeting with fucking Logue in his office and with General Walker. March 1963. So quit your bullshit in Loran Hall. You don't remember who said that? Yeah, I can tell you all about him. Him and his business partner had just bought another. We were in Logue's office, and there was 5 other people in there besides myself. There was Logue, myself, and the 2 men that had the trucking company, and a man I think was with Texas Optical. I think, or Texas Instrument. I'm positive that it was one of the other. Anyway, the 2 men that were just there owned the truck company. They had just purchased another trucking company for, I think it was $2.5 million, and this made them the largest truck line owner in either Texas or the U.S. I forget which it was, but they had just bought another trucking company. I think it was some big company they just bought, and we were talking about putting $2,000 a piece into a pot and getting up a $20,000 pot, buying a boat, going over to Cuba, pull our raids inside Cuba, comes back with boats and that we could steal from Cuba, start our own fishing fleet so we could be self-sufficient and still pull our raids from these motherships. And he said, bullshit, rather than do this, I'd rather donate into a $50,000 pot and get Kennedy killed. Are you interested? I said, look, friend, I'll go this breaking the Neutrality Act, but forget this. And then Logue jumps up and he says, y'all not talk like that in this office because we don't know we don't know if the room is bugged or something like that. And then another one jumps up and says, I think it was this guy's partner. And he says, shit. Then all we have is Johnson. And the original guy who made the offer says, yeah, but at least he'll take care of Texas and us Texans. And this is where it dropped right there. And you were at the LA meeting. Did they know you were shortly to leave for Dallas? Wheat knew everything about it. He knew when I was leaving in that whole bit. Did they know Billy Seymour, any of them? Aha. Billy Seymour. Okay, let me stop right here and point out the fact that fucking Billy Seymour, William Seymour, the man who was impersonating Oswald all over the place, up to and including at the book depository on November 22nd. There are so many fucking references to William Seymour in the Garrison files that you know that Garrison was on to Billy Seymour. The problem is that there is not a Billy Seymour fucking file in the Garrison files, which means it was destroyed. So we know that Garrison knew a whole lot more than he ever had stated, wrote, told anyone, or had published in the current Garrison archive. I don't think he ever knew that Oswald never worked at the book depository and that Seymour was impersonating him there, but given enough time, he eventually would have figured it out. I'm wondering about what the way your name was later thrown in with Howard. They know Howard. I'm talking about Lawrence Howard. They know Howard. They knew you were going to leave with Howard for Miami by right of way of Dallas. Right. But do you feel they knew Billy Seymour? No, I'm just positive they didn't know Seymour. It would take Patrick to know Billy Seymour. Right. How about General Walker? You said you knew him. I met him once. Reynolds from, I'm positive that's who it was, the one that got hit in the head, shot in the head, or whatever it was. Warren Reynolds. Okay, so let me pause right here. Here's another fucked up connection that shouldn't exist. Warren Reynolds. Warren Reynolds was one of the alleged witnesses to the Tippit shooting. However, Warren Reynolds was working for a car dealership, and him and the owner of that car dealership, I forget his name offhand, those two fucking guys were directly connected to Loran Hall. What? What? That's wild. That's wild. This is another example in the Kennedy assassination where you have witnesses who become recurring witnesses, right? So Warren Reynolds, most people just know as the witness to the Tippit shooting. But no, he was a right-wing fucking fanatic who was in with Loran Hall and these fucking right-wing lunatics. Wild, right? That's some wild shit. Just like the duplicate connection to Carlos Bernier. He pops up in the story twice. Very similar way. All right, so I think that's who it was. I was in Dallas, Texas, and Patrick and myself was there. And the first place we went the day after to get this guy to go there was Morris. He was an attorney, and he's in the Adolfo building. Robert Morris. We were in his office. Who took you to Robert Morris? Patrick. Patrick knew right where to go. In fact, he called him on the phone, and we were right up there, and he says something about, well, you would like to meet General Walker or something like this. And Patrick says, yes, this is one of the fellows we want to see. So he says, let me call this fellow here because he's a friend of Walker's. So he calls him, and I do know that he was a used car salesman and that he made an appointment for us to go there. You went out to Warren Reynolds' used car lot. No, he met us, as I recall. I remember that we met him, but I'll be a goddamn if I can remember where we met him, because I remember he even talked about, quote, I'm getting supplies and sending them down to Miami. Now there isn't much stuff that I can get, but I can get food stuff. Who said this? This used car salesman, Warren Reynolds. And he says, quote, I'm getting like used clothes and food and medical supplies, and I'm sending it to Miami. This is the address I'm sending it to. And then he gave it to Patrick, and I don't know who he was sending it stuff to, but anyway, he was sending that, and he said that he could get us in a boat with General Walker, so he led us there. Boats Welch and his wife, that's Robert Welch, and his wife Patrick and myself all drove up there, and I think it was my car, and we followed Reynolds to Walker's house, and then we all went into Walker's house and sat down in the room with Patrick, was telling him about his group down there in No Name Key, and Walker said something about the fact that I could have had a command of Vietnam if I would have wanted it, because I could have had the Special Forces deal over there. He then talked about some women over in Europe that was the head of a newspaper or some goddamn thing who was one that really screwed him up over there. And she was a communist and all this. All she ever did, she could ruin General Walker. This is another avenue that Billings told me not to mention. The fact about Reynolds, I'm positive that's who it was. So Dick Billings is telling Loran Hall not to mention Reynolds. I wonder the fuck why. I wonder why. Did he give any reason why he wanted you not to mention these things to us? No, except for the fact that it would get me in trouble. What else transpired with General Walker? Well, they talked about the international brigade that Patrick wanted to get started. Interpen? Yes, Interpen. And he gave Walker, Christ, it was a book about this thing that had the background of Interpen and how it would be set up and how their functions would be. And it would be like the SOP and MOP and the whole bit for Interpen. And he gave that to Walker, and they talked about it and what it would take to set up an organization like this. And it couldn't be done in this country, but that it could be done down in Latin America. And Walker says, you're doing a good job, keep it up. But the government's trying to nail your butt and all this stuff, and we left. Did Reynolds leave with you? I don't recall. I really don't. He might have stayed. I don't know. There's an odd organization which we've come across called the International Anti-Communist Brigade, which was headquartered in Alabama. Do you know anything about that at all? No, I don't know anything about that at all, because I was interested only in one thing when I was out giving my talks, and that was to get the equipment for my raid, and this is all I was after. I'm not going to be sitting here and telling you that I was doing this, that this raid was coming off just because I felt loyal to Cuba, because it wasn't. I was going to make some money off that raid. I had one television company that was going to buy some of the film because that's what we were going in for. We were going in for film. That's the reason I took Tom Duncan in. That's the reason I had guys, we need to pull everything on Tom Duncan. And that's the reason I had a 16 millimeter Bolex camera. That's the reason I had 50 reels of film. Part of it was infrared, part of it was colored, and part of it black and white. We had two 35 millimeter cameras. With all the people you talk to, you couldn't find financing. It seems like there should be some interest in what you do. In all the meetings that I went to, I would make like, $28 at this meeting. And the most I ever made at a meeting was around $130. One fellow gave me, he went around to all the different dairy farms, and I think, as I recall, gave me $600, and that was the most. But I made a list. Every time I gave a talk, I gave a receipt for what every time I gave a talk, I gave a receipt for the money, and then I'd take a receipt myself, and then I'd return this receipt over to Jose Norman, who was a Cuban. Also, Jose Norman turned it over to John Russillo of the John Birch Society, and then I got ready to leave. I had much receipts for the equipment purchased. That was the money that was given. It was hardly worth it. It really wasn't. Here's a picture of General Walker's house with the car parked in the back. That hole was punched in the film after the federal government got hold of the picture so that you can't see the license. The car, I think, is around a 57 Chevy. Did you ever see that with any of those individuals when you went there? No, because as I recall, I took my, when we went up there, I'm almost positive, then we went in Boats Welch's car. Let me pause right here for a second. So there's a very famous picture of General Walker's house with a 57 Chevy, possibly a 58 Chevy in the back, but the license plate was scratched off. It's been identified. Maybe Garrison will identify it here in this interview, but that vehicle is very important because leading up to the Walker shooting, which was on April 10th, so on around April 7th and around April 9th, a large husky Latino was seen driving a 57 or 58 Chevy around the area of of Walker's house. Now, who the fuck could that fucking husky Latino be? And I'm gonna guess he had a pockmarked face, or he had bumps all over his face, and obviously it was Lawrence Howard. So this vehicle that he's talking about is obviously the vehicle that was being seen driven around Walker's house in the days leading up to the assassination, the owner of which has been identified. The vehicle also seen by Kirk Coleman outside of Walker's house when he was actually shot at. And Kirk Coleman refused to identify Oswald, and ultimately I was able to identify Lawrence Howard and William Seymour as the men who shot at Walker's house. So that 57 Chevy is the one that he's asking about, and he already knows the information about it being seen around Walker's house leading up to Walker's shooting. So that's that. What kind of car did he have? He's asking about Welch. He says, I don't recall. I'm positive it was not I'm almost positive it was not a 57 Chevy. You don't recall seeing that car? No, I don't recall ever seeing that car. Did you ever hear of someone named Frank Kilhir? Kilhir? No, I don't recall. What about this picture? No, I don't recall. This is the first time I've ever seen the volumes. This is one of the volumes from the 26. It's really not worth wasting your time on. It would be better to read Weisberg and Lane and some of the critics. I tried to read Weisberg. I can't do it. He's a hard read, but I know there's a wealth of information there, I realize. You can pick up things, but goddamn, I tried to read it. Read Rush to Judgment. Have you read that? Yeah, Mark Lane's. The three that I thought were real good writings was Rush to Judgment, Turner's article on You. In fact, that was the best I've read. And Penn Jones, Forgive My Grief 1 and 2. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reading through Forgive My Grief when I go on the road next month. I'm going on the road on Fish Tour for like 4 weeks. And so I'll be doing podcasts from the car, and Penn Jones' Forgive My Grief is one of the things we're going to be reading. All right, so tell me, when did the FBI first interview you after the assassination? September of 64. Did you ever manage to determine how they got onto you? I know now, but not in 64. I didn't know until about a month ago that the FBI had started to check on me, and that there was a report made on me on the November 22nd or 23rd of November 1963. Yep, and we'll talk about that here. I did not know until 3 or 4 weeks ago that Patrick had called and said to Morris that I had to call him. I did not know that Patrick had called Mr. Logue and told him to get me out of Dallas, Texas on the day of the assassination. I didn't know none of this. Holy shit. So we've got confirmation from Loran Hall that Jerry Hemming, that's who Patrick is, Jerry Hemming contacted Lester Logue and told him to get Hall out of fucking Dallas on November 22nd. That's wild. That's fucking wild. I thought that, in fact, I couldn't figure out that they even knew about me in 64. I figured the goddamn thing was over, finished and done when I came off on the hill, and the FBI man wanted to talk to me. It shook me up a little. All right, so what he's talking about is on November 22nd, 1963. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and say November 23rd, 1963. The FBI was made aware of the Johnson 30-06 rifle that Hall used on the 6th floor that he fired from the opposite corner of the sniper's nest. This rifle was ditched somewhere in Dealey Plaza. The only information we have on where it was found was that there was rumors it was located by the lawn crew. But my perspective on the rifle is, doesn't fucking matter where it was found, because the FBI knew about it and went to great lengths to contact Richard Hathcock in Los Angeles at Allied Detective Agency, in which he told him the story about Loran Hall and an unidentified Mexican husky Latino with a pockmarked face who accompanied him and picked up the rifle a couple weeks before the assassination, about 5 weeks if I'm not mistaken, and then a couple days before the assassination, Loran Hall goes and tells Richard Hathcock that he's got to catch a flight to Dallas, which he didn't catch a flight to Dallas. He was already in Dallas, and because he drove there, right? So all this stuff leads back to Richard Hathcock and the Johnson 30-06 rifle that he used, that the FBI found, that they still to this day deny, but we have pictures of. So I'm pretty goddamn confident the United States government still has this Johnson 30-06 rifle that I have photographs of And that probably needs to be uncovered through a Freedom of Information Act request. So let me continue on. Have you ever read those FBI reports? I read the one where it said, yes, I knew Mrs. Odio. And then I say, no, I don't know Mrs. Odio. That's hilarious. That was the second one. Did they correctly report what you said? What's the explanation? Well, I said it's possible that I met a Mrs. Odio, but I never said that I was there with Seymour and Howard at that same time. Someone goes so far as to say in one of the reports that I knew her parents or something in prison in Cuba. Is that in one of the, that's what the person that Mrs. Odio says. Well, you see, I wasn't even in Cuba in 1960. I got out of Cuba, I think, in September. But the interesting thing is that you state, it says, quote, Hall stated that this Cuban woman lived in apartment A of the same apartments located on Magellan Circle where a Cuban friend of his by the name of Kiki Ferrer lived. And then Hall says, now, here's how that came about. All right, so let me just fucking cut to the chase here. Hall's lying. Hall, Howard, and Seymour obviously were the three men who went to Sylvia Odio's house because William Seymour was one of two men who was impersonating Oswald all the fuck over the place, right? So it's obvious, it's brutally obvious that it was them. And then on top of it being brutally obvious, we get Loran Hall's confession in his, what was it? It was September the 16th, 1964 interview with the FBI, which he then recants on September the 24th, 1964 to the FBI. That's what fucking Garrison's talking about, and Loran Hall's a fucking liar. Period. So, let us continue. Now, here's how that came about. He said, do you know a Mrs. Odio? And I said, it's quite possible that I do know. I don't know. And what about Magellan Circle? And the name did sound familiar to me. And I said, if it's the same place that one of my Cuban friends lived at, it's possible that I met her. And he said, what were the circumstances on this? So I explained to him that it was one of the new apartment buildings, you know, one of the new modern type. And it was a square deal. And it was in the center, I think, a swimming pool. And had an open area, like he lived on the north side of the apartment building, close to the front entrance. And I remember one time that I did ask a lady, I think she was about 40, I'd say in her late 40s. And I asked her where this person lived. And she told me so-and-so. And I went and knocked on the door and I went in. But I never met any other woman. Okay, I'm just sitting here in total shock and awe because he's admitting he went to her fucking house. He's admitting he went to her fucking house. Okay? But I never met any other woman there, and I was told, I was in there twice, and I still don't know if that was the name of the street or not, Magellan Circle. I sure as hell like to found out if it was. He came back later and wanted to know where it was at, and I said, to the best that I can recall, it was North Magnum store. Isn't it Magnum, or a big store in Dallas? Anyway, I told him it was approximately 12 to 14 blocks north of it, and then about 10 or 12 blocks to the west of it. And this is where the Cuban lived, and said that fits, and that fits right to the letter. And so this is how it's going to go in the report. All right, let me just fucking capitulate what he just said here. He just admitted a second time that he went to fucking Sylvia Odio's house. He went in there twice, and then he's denying the rest of the story. Look, it's so obvious. What other trio of guys with one guy who looked like Oswald and another one looked like a big husky Cuban could it possibly have been? None. End of story. Kiki Ferrer did live on... that was not his name. I thought it was his name, but it was almost positive that that wasn't it. Do you suppose that they got it from Kiki Ferrer? I don't know. I think Kiki Ferrer's name is in there. There's Kiki Ferrer. They took the Mass off. That's... about this, what that says. Hall said that they contacted 3 professors at the university in Dallas who were Cuban refugees. One of the professors was named. I said that. I said that's what I thought possibly one's name was Odio. This Cuban that lived there in this apartment house took me there, and this is when I was trying to, I talked to Logan. We were talking about setting up a Cuban government in exile and getting all the raider groups together that we could go ahead and pull the invasion into Cuba, hold an area for like 24 hours, and then get on the radios and everything with the president of the Cuban exiles in Cuba and ask for assistance from the OAS and from the United Nations. And what I was trying to do was to get support from these 3 professors to try to help write up the Constitution and all that stuff, and would there be for it a way back this thing? And this is when I went back to see. This is what I went back to see them for. Let me go back to California for a moment. When you were with these people, did any of them indicate that they knew General Walker? Not that I recall that they knew him, but they knew of him and they were interested in him. Did they know anybody else in Dallas like Mr. Morris? I'm positive they knew Morris. I know there was that's Robert Morris. If I hadn't said it, guys, let's pull everything on Robert Morris in Dallas. I know there was even talk about someone in California. I don't know who in the hell it was, but they said that he had just got back from China. I mean, from the Formosa, and he had been talking with Chiang Kai-shek. And we talked about this when we got to Dallas, Texas, because he said that then Chiang Kai-shek was ready to invade China. The only thing was that holding him down was our government in the 7th Fleet. And this is one of the things that Morris related to us. And I swear that I don't know who it was that mentioned this. I'm almost positive it was at Wheat's house, but I don't know for sure, though, that this is where the information came from. Did this fellow Warren Reynolds seem to have much interest from the Cuban situation in Miami and so forth? Well, he told me that there was a gathering the equipment, clothing, food, medical supplies, and all this, and sending it down. I send something down, he says, at least once a month, and he says, I've been doing for this, so I don't know. It sounds like how many months? It sounded like it would have been probably the last 7 or 8 months, as I recall it. That was it. I take it that the name Jack Ruby never came up at that time. No, never came up. And is something that when you think it's absolutely amazing that that I didn't meet him. I mean, really, honest to Christ. He was connected to Warren Reynolds. And then, oh, fuck. See, this is great because Loran Hall was in the Carousel Club on November 10th with Lawrence Howard and William Seymour, where they were reported on by Harvey Llewellyn Wade, who was a businessman from Chicago, who was down in Dallas from November 10th to November 14th. And on the night of November 10th, he goes into the Carousel Club and he sees 3 guys. One of them is a large husky Latino with a pockmarked face. Another one looks like Oswald, and another one's about 5'10" with a flat top, and he's up on stage dancing with strippers because Loran Hall could never contain himself. So it was obvious those 3 guys were in the Carousel Club on November 10th. Obviously, they knew Warren Reynolds. They were probably there with Warren. Shit, this fills in a gap for me. They were probably in there with Warren Reynolds, and Warren Reynolds was directly connected to Jack Ruby. So to me, the idea that these 3 guys were not connected to Jack Ruby is utterly ridiculous. Was he connected to Warren Reynolds? And then Hall says, let me put it this way. I was there and I met that real kooky bastard Wally Yates. I think I told you about him having the explosives in the garage, and he was a nice guy and all this, but he was like, he wanted to do something like go on a raid or something like this here. Like, you can leave and be back in a week because I can get a week's leave of absence from my job because I wanted to do something. And he had the carbine in the garage with the telescope on it, and I think he even said it was 7 or 8 pounds of explosive that he had on a goddamn primer caps in the box with the explosive and the whole thing. And like, I finally talked him into the notion of taking that shit out and burying it, because like it could blow his wife and kid up. I went with him looking for equipment one time, and we looked at 4 or 5 different arms stores in Dallas, Texas, and like one of them could have said, go to Jack Ruby, but they didn't. Like, it's a damn miracle that Logue didn't know a Jack Ruby, and Garrison then says, did Yates take you to Honest Joe's? Oh, fuck, this is a great interview, man. He's bringing in Honest Joe to this deal. I don't know the names of the arms places where I went, but we went to hell 5 or 6. Did he ever take you to a real strange-looking kind of pawn shop? Yeah, they didn't have anything there, and I wanted automatic weapons. Reuben Goldstein. That's fucking Honest Joe for you. And if the man walked in right here now, as I recall, the fellow who would have been, oh Christ, he probably would have been in his early or middle 20s. You're talking about the man at the pawn shop place. Yeah, the place where we went in, and that's about all I could tell you about him. Did you ever see this guy before? He's an acquaintance of Warren Reynolds. I can't say. That's Daryl Gardner. The police arrested him for shooting Warren Reynolds and kept him about 6 days, and then an alibi was produced, and they let him go. Let me show you a more famous picture. You recognize Lee Oswald in it. This is taken in front of the Trade Mart. There are several individuals there we'd be interested in identifying, as I'm wondering if anyone besides Oswald looks familiar to you. There was at least one Latin person in there. Let me point him out with a pencil. Does he look familiar? No, he doesn't. How about this person here? Let me show you. Does this one here, he's wearing the jacket? No, I looked at this the same thing yesterday, and I see thousands of people. Like when I was in Dallas, Logue would take us down to dinner, and there'd be, oh Christ, all kinds of people would come up and introduce themselves and talk. It's like when I stayed with Wally Yates, and he had taken me to 5 or 6 different places, and I like it when I was in California. Heck, I met thousands of people out there giving my talks in the same way in Miami. Christ almighty, you see these people and people and people. I don't recognize anybody out there. In fact, I don't recognize Oswald. If it hadn't been for the fact, to me, he doesn't look like him at all. Who is this fellow, William Garland? Turns out to have been killed. Garland, oh yeah. And that's what we're going to call it for today, ladies and gentlemen. We're about halfway through. We're on page 25 of 51. I will be back tomorrow to wrap this up. If you're watching this on Rumble, I'd appreciate it if you would just subscribe to my podcast, because I fucking hate Rumble. Okay? subscribe to my podcast on Spreaker is probably the best place to get my content. Or if you're interested in debunking the Holocaust and the National Socialist movement, you can sign up for my Substack, bloodyhistory.substack.com. Today we're going to be doing a show on that. We're going to be covering the last, I don't know, we got about 80 pages of Mein Kampf to get through. We're probably going to do about 40 of them today. But that's going to do it, guys. Tune into my other stuff. Go to CoreyHughes.org. Go to Amazon and buy my book. It's going to do it for me. I'll see you guys tomorrow.